The YouTube channel. We're here at Indian Ladder Farm Cidery and Brewery. I am Jeff from EQX. We're gonna have a fun one today. This might turn into 2 episodes. It's gonna be so ridiculous. I feel like
we got some special guests.
We do.
Part 1, part 2.
We would love to introduce.
This is Dieter, Scott, and Alex, who you know from previous episodes. We've got our executive producer over here. Have we come up with a new nickname for our executive producer?
It's Julio.
Julio, fantastic having you on the sound check here. And those guest voices that you hear over there. We got Chris.
The screaming goat's got her tongue.
and Jeff.
Yes, that's correct.
Welcome,
Yes.
welcome to Agricultural Acts. I imagine you're going to contribute not only educationally during this episode. That shrug even came through just in audio.
We just brought a lot of beer. That was our contribution.
Great.
Where are you guys from?
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Like
Shout it out.
like I guess that's a loaded question. Like, where are we from?
Who you representing
now?
up in Agricultural Acts?
That's
What
all
city
you
is that?
represent.
That's a better question. So, we are out of Fonda, New York. We are actually we're a transplant from Colorado, Adam Brewing Company, and we just closed up the brewery in Colorado and moved it here to upstate New York almost 10 months ago.
Yes.
And so we are changing the name a little bit. We'll be Adam Farm and Fermentation because we are going to be trying to become a full-on farm brewery. But that's where we're. That's who we are. That's the
Do you
short and
have
sweet.
ties to this area, or were you like? Because I moved here from Colorado as well about 10 years ago, and I just kind of threw a dart at the map.
Yeah.
So that's a great question when you ask where we're. Sorry, that's a great question when you ask where we're from. I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, and his family is originally from Prattsville, New
Okay.
York. So where we're from is from New York. We just ended up making a full circle over so many years.
All right. Well, welcome to the area, Fonda, New York. No relation to Peter, I don't think, right? Does Peter Fonda have any ties to that area?
Actually, the Fonda family is related.
This is why we have Dieter, right?
Dieter knows everything.
He knows that's true story.
He's a
Because
wealth of
again,
knowledge.
It is absolutely true.
as you've come to know by listening to previous episodes, and if you haven't, please, that you don't need to listen in any particular order, but listen to the Agricultural Acts. We don't often know if Dieter is being factual or just fun.
Is it
pretty
one of
much
the
just,
Douglases from Fonda?
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, sorry.
Come on.
Damn, that's how you say it up here,
Obviously
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam.
So it must, it not really, I mean, obviously east of Denver, a lot of farm area, but in Denver, tough to do a farm brewery. So you got all
Right.
the space you need in Peter Fonda.
Right, exactly, and that was a big factor with making the move here. Is you know, our brewery in Colorado we had for 6 years, and from the years before we even opened it, the idea was ultimately to have space to grow and grow produce, fruit, berries, hops, whatever, and that was always the long-term goal. But the property and cost of living, everything in Colorado over the last 6 to 8 years have just skyrocketed. And so if you can even find farmland in Colorado anymore, it's astronomical. Just down the road from where we were at, there was a 6-acre farm that was for sale, and they wanted $6.5 million for it. So it just wasn't going to happen there.
Yeah.
And so we kind of started looking back this way. We were visiting here in 2019. Both of us hadn't been back in a long time. Kind of forgot how beautiful upstate New York was and all that it had to offer in the farming realm. And
When you come from the arid climate out there, the greenery here, right? Just
we were
blows your
blown away.
mind.
We kept making comments about how it reminded us of Ireland and stuff like that because it was so green. I mean, even the snow just melted and there's green grass under it already. So
It's still brown though.
no, that's not brown. You got to go to Colorado and see brown.
Yeah.
That's sand.
Well, so I want to pick back up right where you were, but did you sell the brewery in Denver or just
No.
No,
shut
we
it
just
down?
shut it down. Just shut it down.
Shut it down.
brought all
loaded
the
everything
beer,
up, and
obviously, right?
Brought as much as we could.
No,
with us,
you
yeah.
cannot bring beer across state lines. That's illegal.
What?
Yeah, it's called bootlegging. You ever seen Smokey and the Bandit?
I don't think he has.
Yeah, I have, but
I was gonna say I have it on DVD.
I'm just thinking because I just crossed state lines. So no, I didn't bring any beer across state lines. Yeah, all right. Back to it, Jeff and Chris.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I mean, from a personally, you can of course drive beer across state lines, but from a brewery standpoint, no, you can't legally bring your own beer from one state to the other. There's a lot of laws involved in that, and the feds would like to be aware of that taking place. So, yeah. So, but we loaded up all the all the equipment that we could to bring with us, and we are in the process of building right now.
Very cool.
Yep.
But we hope we can help you in any way, shape, or form. So the goal of this episode of Agricultural Acts is to talk about wild fermentation. So this makes perfect sense that you would be our guests.
Yep.
Now, do we want to dive right into that, or do we want to just BS for a while? Because we do have this screaming goat here.
We do.
And along with the screaming goat,
Yeah,
you
I
know I like to
power of
play
that.
games, right?
I guess.
So
Are we playing games now?
yeah, just a quick break for a game. It's a trivia. It's a trivia game. This book came along with the screaming goats. You got this book too with your screaming goat? Sorry, so you can't participate back there because you know all the answers.
We might be at an advantage because we do have goats on our farm.
All right.
So
Well, we'll see how you're raising those
okay, we'll
goats.
see.
See if you have a license here. Okay, I think this is a question regarding the eye of the goat.
It's the
Breaking
eye
the
of
songs.
goat.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
It wasn't Survivor, was it?
This is a long question. In the animal kingdom, goats aren't exactly number one in the food chain. There are a lot of hungry animals that prey on them. But one of the great built-in survival mechanisms a goat has is its keen night vision, great depth, and peripheral vision, which is all thanks to its rectangular pooples.
I had a rectangular poople once.
That's wild.
I drank a lot. It was spontaneous drinking, and yeah, I had a rectangular poople.
We're staying with the spontaneous theme. You see that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
I thought he said it was a rectangular poop hole.
Yeah.
That was like,
Yeah.
Which wombats, if you didn't
yeah,
know,
let's
talk about
wombats do
right?
poop cubes.
it's like a hybrid wombat
Yeah.
goat.
Yeah. Fortunately, we never get off on a tangent.
No, never.
we did
And
just-
speaking of wombats, we got to get them here for a concert. But anyway, back to the question.
Are they from Australia? Probably
yeah,
Nashville.
no, I think they are. I think they
Oh,
are.
I'm not.
But anyway, the
nothing
goat,
to say now.
they can scout their surroundings from 320 to 340 degrees in one glance. Humans, only 160 to 210 degrees. So
what's
with
the
that
question?
fun fact, the
what's the
question
question?
is,
How many eyes do you have?
how high can a goat jump?
Depends on the breed of goat.
10, 5, 15, or 12 feet?
Depends on the breed of the
10,
goat.
I'm going to
5,
say 5.
15, or
Are
12.
we talking a milking goat or a pygmy
Right,
goat?
it probably
You
does
know, I
depend,
mean,
right? But
Does the
it's
goat
a-
have
in
moon
this-
boots?
In this case, it's a screaming goat.
Do they get a running start,
wow.
or is it
I
just
don't think
stationary?
10, 5, or 15?
If it's a screaming,
I'm
I think
gonna
I could
say
throw that
10.
thing
Or
15
12.
feet.
I'm going to go 10.
10. Scotty, you said 5. Jeff?
5.
I'm going to go with 10.
10.
Yeah.
Dieter? 12. Alex?
This creek beer tastes amazing.
That's correct. That's actually the correct
good
answer.
job.
Wow.
Yeah. Cheers. I'll drink to that.
Good job.
Clinky, clinky.
Good job.
What's the story behind this creek beer?
How high could the jump?
Is this your beer?
Yes, it is.
All right, great.
This is absolutely
so how-
phenomenal. Seriously.
5.
It's 5.
5 feet.
Hells yeah.
All right, so we're enjoying
That'd be
a
crazy. That'd be crazy if it could jump 12 feet.
You win a glass of Creek.
Oh, hells yeah.
Creek
Thanks, Jeff.
beer, spelled Kriek,
That
which is how I always spell it anyway. And back where I'm from in Western Pennsylvania, born and raised, Crick.
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 Yes.
Adam Brewing Company, cherries on the label. Tell us everything about it.
Spill your guts.
Spill my guts.
Yeah.
Let's see here. What do
Lay
I
it
want
out
to? What
there.
do I want to tell you?
Well, it has cherries.
Yeah, there's cherries in there. Real cherries. We didn't use, we didn't use any fake flavoring or gummy bears or anything ridiculous like that. So.
Is that they really do use
Oh,
gummy
absolutely.
bears?
Of
Some
course.
people
Of
for the
course.
flavoring.
Yeah. Yep, it's kind of
No
ridiculous.
artificial color.
No artificial
either,
color.
Which is why if you were looking, you would see that there is no bright red. We didn't put any hibiscus or anything like that to give it that bright red color. Any color that you see in it is from natural.
Yep. So it's a, the base beer is a golden sour that we barrel aged for a year. Actually, this one was probably closer to 14, 15 months. And then from there, we took that beer and we did about 3 pounds per gallon of Mount Morrissey cherries. Put them in a custom-built punch-down vessel, which if anybody doesn't know what a punch-down is, it comes from the wine world, where you actively push the fruit down on typically a daily, if not multiple times a day. You push the fruit back down into the liquid, so it helps with the extraction of color and flavor. And
Does it hold it down there? Or
no, you just have
okay,
like you just have a tool that's got basically like a big flat disc on it or something that you just kind of, you're almost like stirring it, but
Okay.
you're gently pushing the fruit back down in there, because otherwise it all just floats to the top. And anything that's breaking the surface, you're not really getting anything out of that. So you do the punch down and push it back in there. So we took the base beer, put it in a punch down vessel, 3 pounds per gallon of cherries, punched down twice a day for about 2 weeks. Kind of just eyeballed it and tasted as we went. Then transferred the beer back into barrels, let it set for another 6 months. Then took that out and packaged it up, bottle conditioning. And now you got what you got. And that's been in the bottle now for, what, year?
Little over.
Probably a little over a year that
Okay,
it's been in the
that,
bottle
that
now.
holds up real well. It's fantastic. You think this was just put in that bottle yesterday? It tastes super fresh. It's so much labor into this, and watch how quick I just destroy it.
Right?
Down the hatch.
All that work. Yeah, so this, all that work and this flavor. So this is a solid, like probably 2.5 on Untapped. So, because it doesn't have, because it doesn't have, because there's no marshmallows or anything like that in it.
Because there's no gummy bears in there. That's why.
Yeah.
If I had used cherry gummy bears, this would be a 5. So
I haven't personally asked you this question, but like what you're saying, what made you want to get into this style of beer making, aside from the traditional style or like the commercial style where everybody's paying the bills with the hype beers? Like, why are you sticking to your ribs with this kind of beer making?
early on in my, when I first started drinking, craft beers or macro produced beers, I was pretty much drinking anything that I could find that was coming out of Belgium. And early on when I started home brewing, I think like anybody else that starts brewing, I started with like an amber ale or something like that. And quickly you realize that was boring as shit to brew amber ales and anything in that realm. And I immediately went into brewing Belgian beers, quads, and triple, anything I could, and then that just morphed into trying to, and this is back in the early 2000s, trying to figure out how to get my hands on, any kind of mixed cultures, just learning what I could. Then when we moved to Colorado, I managed to get, or was lucky enough, I guess, to get involved in a homebrew club there that had a bunch of guys that felt the same way. So we started a barrel program in the homebrew club, and at one point we had about 36 barrels going in the homebrew club. And so that was really when it, gave me a chance to start fine-tuning, or not fine-tuning, but like growing my knowledge. We'd also become really good friends with some folks at Avery, Avery Brewing, and so they opened their doors to us to, to start learning things. And then it just kind of went from there. And then when we started looking at yeast, this is when Chris jumped in, so.
Well, I think a good answer to that, too, though, is the reason why we stuck with continuing to make the beers that we make and not jumping on to making, that is because we made beers that we enjoy.
Right.
We really enjoy these beers.
As do I.
As what we always joked is that when we start a brewery that if we went belly up, we would have a lot of beer that we really like to drink. So,
I love it.
So if we never sold a bottle of beer, we would have cases and cases of beer that we enjoyed drinking.
Right,
So
right.
that was always our our joke.
Yeah.
So
that always drove it, was just the passion behind brewing what we really enjoy.
what we enjoyed drinking.
You know, I don't really enjoy. I mean, I don't mind them, but I don't enjoy drinking IPAs and all that type of stuff. So it wouldn't be something that I'd be interested in brewing, because I think when you're brewing something that you're passionate about, I think it shows in the end product versus just paying the bills with something.
And it definitely shows, because you guys are here at the podcast right now, and like, you know, we didn't just choose some random people. We see what you guys are doing, and we really value that, and that embodies, like, you know, something that we're trying to be about. And so it's like, it's great to have you here and kind of riff about, you know, what you guys are doing and what we're doing.
Right.
So that's
How
totally
did this connection come between Indian Ladder Farms and Adam Brewing? How did it come about?
Actually, a mutual friend introduced us. Miguel, if you're out there, Miguel. Hey, Miguel.
Yep. Hey, Miguel. Beer Trekker.
Yep, the
If
Beer
you're-
Trekker.
If you're looking for him out there in the world of Facebook and Instagram, so he's connected a lot of people over the years, and he knew that these guys were moving to this area, and we'd been friends with Miguel for a number of years, and so last fall he said, "You guys need to meet."
Nice.
So here we are.
Trekker.
Beer Trekker.
And that's literally what Miguel does, is just connect people.
That's one of the things he does. He does a lot of photography, goes to breweries. He does promoting. You know, he gets hired by breweries to help with their, websites and so on.
Nice. I love it. Yep. All right. So on my drive here, I came up with, I want to learn about fermentation, wild fermentation. And this is going to be your entire process. This is what Indian Ladder Farms has, it's your life, most of it, right?
We are involved in fermentation on a lot of levels.
We're gonna let Peter talk about this.
So
We're in the dojo now.
if you've never listened to Agricultural Acts, it's kind of, as the host, I need it explained to me like I'm a 2-year-old. Or is the saying 5-year-old? But explain it to me like I'm a 2-year-old is how I need to learn these
Scott
things.
Start this, but you should never look at it that way. It's like, it's. For example, like when Laurie was writing the hop book, it's like people just assume that you know things.
Right.
And
I
you should
mean,
never.
I feel like I should know what the heck fermentation is.
Well, and people are always
I
like,
don't.
you say something to them, and they're like, "Oh yeah," and you look at, they have a blank look. You know they don't know, but they're afraid. But they're afraid to ask, and and that's part of what this podcast is supposed to be about.
Right. And I'm not
is
afraid.
is to tell people, just the basic stuff. Yeah, a lot of people who are listening to this are way more advanced, but a lot aren't.
So fermentation, and let's just take wild fermentation away from it. What is fermentation? And then we'll talk about the difference between wild and non-wild.
So fermentation is
Scotty Veltman, everybody.
Hi. Woo! Hey, everybody. Hey, you in the back. Knock it off. No, fermentation is honestly, I think it's probably the greatest discovery in mankind. First fire, and then fermentation. If you didn't have fermentation of having these tiny little organisms convert sugar into alcohol or any other wonderful thing, you wouldn't have cheese, you wouldn't have sauerkraut, you wouldn't have beer, you wouldn't have cider, you wouldn't have wine. And at that point, what else is there to live for?
You wouldn't have agriculture.
That's right.
And then you wouldn't have agricultural acts. So
Episode 7.
Dave, you brought that right around. Thank you. Right? That's why you're here.
So that was like a big roundabout way for him to market himself.
And Adam Brewing, AdamBrewing.com, ILFCB, right? Is that the website still?
Still.
All right, cool.
Adam Brewing.
ILFCB.com. All right, so without fermentation, life sucks.
Yep.
Doesn't even exist.
That is true. Well, I'd be out of a job.
So obviously it started as wild fermentation.
That's true.
We couldn't assume that the person who discovered and built fire for the first time was also like, oh yeah, watch this, hold my
Right.
beer. This is called fermentation.
Was it the Samaritans that did something like that?
Yeah.
Sumerians.
Sumerian.
Not the Samaritans, not the good people.
Oh, the good. They ended up being Samaritans.
Great Samaritans.
Okay, so
It's the first civilization.
they had their pots they would grow barley and wheat, and they would put them into the pots and kind of like let them dry out. But then rain happens, and when the rain went into that pot, it filled it up full of water, and you basically made a little mash, and then it warmed up, and then the wild microbes that are floating in the air started creating alcohol, and it started bubbling. And I wanted to be that first dude. You're like, hey, what's that all about?
Yeah.
Let me take a sip of that.
Yeah, can you imagine that? You walk out and there's this pot of grain that you've been sitting out there forever, and it's like bubbling.
smells like shit,
and
but
your first thought process is to like, I'm going to take a drink of it. It's like, oh, let me try that. Like, can you?
The Samaritans were hungry.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, it must have
sure.
been out of desperation,
Yeah, I'm sure it came more around the fact that
And
they were
then
like, well, we're going to eat it anyway, so
It was like, here, eat this or drink this. Does this make you a little bit funky?
Then they
too?
discovered, that there was a little bit extra.
Man, that's the best batch of grain ever.
And so
And somebody put two and two together.
Does anybody have any more of that rotten porridge?
we maybe don't
I think
understand.
Roger down the street has some.
They didn't understand scientifically what was going on or anything, right? It was, and this is what fascinates me so much is like, there were no labs, there were no, you send this away and get this tested or all of the research before whatever. It was literally like a moment by moment experimentation in real time.
We may have lost a few along the way.
A few good men.
Great
Lost a
point.
few good men.
Great
Wild
point.
fermentation is the beginning.
Yeah.
And, everything beyond that is, it's all clinical, but wild fermentation was the very beginning of any type of fermentation.
So that was funny what you said. We may have lost a few along the way, but when fermentation goes wrong, that's maybe a whole nother episode, right? I mean,
Well, it's a very short episode.
Dump it or die.
I mean, so it's not like something either fermented or it didn't. It could be something fermented and did in a bad way.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, we're still pretty much, sensory is a huge part of it. I mean, in fermentation, there's a lot to be said. If it smells like it's going to kill you, don't drink it.
Okay. All right.
Or wait a few months.
Yeah, it could get better.
Which is mind blowing right there. So see, this is
Sounds like
we're,
the cider world.
Yeah, and I say it jokingly, but it is a valid statement. I mean, we have had that happen before, where you go out and you open up a barrel and you smell it and you're like, oh, it is just, you're like, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy.
But so to me, I think, if I see that in the toilet, I flush it down. You don't get rid of it. You know that maybe
Potentially. It could get better. And
Sometimes it might
happened.
even be a happy accident. Like,
Sure.
we're like, oh, the barrel's there, and we go to smell it, and it's like, and then, well, we don't have time to take care of it right now, and then you forget about it.
So you mark the barrel. And
You
then
mark
you're
the
like,
barrel, and you move on with your life, and you go on, and then
You
6 months later, you go back to it, and you go, oh yeah, there's that barrel. We need that barrel, and you open it up, and you're like,
Ooh.
sweet Jesus, that smells awesome.
Yep.
And then you taste it, and you're like, well, holy buckets, that's great.
Yeah, that happens. That's not like a rare thing. I mean, that happens quite a bit. I mean, you talk to any brewery or brewer who's made wild fermentation, spontaneous fermentation. They all have that same story where they've had beer before, where a few months in or 6 months in, it just smelled like hot garbage, baby diaper. I mean, it was just everything you would wish on your worst enemy. And for one reason or another, a few months later, they went back, and it was just this most beautiful, pristine beer you've ever
That way
had.
in the cider world too. We
Yeah.
have tanks. Alex can attest to this. That it's like, we don't really have time to dump it. Put it in the back.
Well,
And then we go like, oh, let's go clean that tank. We're like, well, what were we thinking? This is pretty darn good.
definitely like acidity and alcohol are your friend for cleaning up the mess.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah, Wild
you know,
Yeast do
when
an
you have
amazing
that
job of cleaning up
combination,
their own messes.
it can be your friend and help clean up that mess. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's where, as a professional, you have to decide if it's like, you know what, this isn't what the people want, but sometimes that works in a really amazing way, and it just, it makes an amazing product that's so nuanced and so different that it does taste good, and it's like.
If a year later it still smells like shit, it's shit.
Luckily
That's the cutoff.
Yeah.
That's the time. 365
I'm
days.
just saying,
and
you
luckily
gotta
in
be a
the
point.
in the apple world, tannins also help with, cleaning up the mess.
I was talking to my friend today, Keller. You guys know Keller.
Oh, yeah.
He was telling me a story about as a child, his family would their favorite snack was chopped liver on a cracker, and he was the only child that enjoyed the chopped liver on a cracker until his cousin told him. She slowed down the speech. She said, "It's chopped liver." He thought it was just chopped liver. Like that would, and so from that moment forward, he could never have chopped liver on a cracker again. Having smelled that dumpster fire inside the barrel, is it impossible to get that out of your head, or do you go on to brew it up or make a cider out of it and enjoy it later? Can you separate those worlds?
Sure. I mean, I don't think you ever forget that smell. So you know what you're looking for the next time. But it hasn't deterred me.
But you're thinking, this is awesome now, delicious. But I know what that was.
Yeah. You know, but then you appreciate. I think in my mind anyway, you kind of appreciate the beauty of what the yeast and the bacteria did. I mean, we didn't interfere at all. We just let nature take its course, and it cleaned itself up and made something just amazing.
Yeah.
And so I look at it at that point and appreciate the fact that what the yeast and the bacteria can do. Versus like, oh, I just didn't dump it, or I brought it out and it's like, oh, I'm just going to cover it with hops or.
And now that I think about that question,
something.
I mean, we all know that our delicious food is grown in manure, so
That's
Right?
you know, I'm able to move on past that.
Good
Which
point, right?
also, this is also saying like, what we're talking about. It's not like, the mess that's being cleaned up. Whatever we're saying, it's not like the most disgusting thing, and then it just becomes amazing. It's just more like, because we're all like accustomed to the smells and what's going on in the barrel and what's going on with the fermentation. It's just like, it doesn't smell like the way you wanted it to go, and it's a little bit off, but then time helps it become the way you wanted it to be, or it changes into something even greater. But it's not like you're
Not
taking
always.
you're taking vomit and turning it into champagne, but it's like, it's not that crazy,
That's
but
what
it's
you're doing in the cidery?
no, I'm saying we're not doing that, guy.
I mean,
doing
sometimes
that.
vomit just
No,
is
it's
vomit.
not like, it's not becoming like a 0 out of 10 and then it becoming a 10 out of 10, but it's like, it's turning an 8 out of a 10 into a 10 out of a 10 or something like that. It's,
And it can
it's just making something really,
It can
I do
go-
have the Screaming Goat book.
Speaking of screaming goat.
All right, so we have a basic, very general beginning understanding of wild fermentation. I want to find out what the opposite of that is, but yeah, let's ask another question here from the Screaming Goat book. What is a large group of goats called?
Herd.
A team, a horde, a pack, a herd. Those are your 4 choices.
a lot of fun.
4.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, going with D, herd.
D herd, 4 herd.
Herd.
I heard that. It's herd.
It's
Really?
a herd.
So what were you gonna say, Dieter?
I was going to go with insurrectionist mob.
Oh yeah. Agricultural X here at Indian Ladder Farms. We've got Dieter, we got Scott, we got Alex, we got Juan, our executive producer. Right?
Wasn't it?
Dorcas?
Julio.
Dorcas.
Julio.
D-O-R-C-A-S.
Actually, Julio left earlier.
Julio,
Julio left.
right? And we
Dorcas
got
took over.
He had some business
Chris
to take
and
care
Jeff from Adam Brewing, Farm and Fermentation.
of. We're
The new
becoming
is
Adam Farm and Fermentation. Yes.
Adam Farm and Fermentation Brewery.
No.
No.
Adam Farm F. Down there in Peter Fonda, New York.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
down there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Over
Over.
there.
It's
Over there.
over. And a little down? Just a wee bit down?
Definitely over.
It's down and
A
out.
little up and over.
Up and over.
Yeah,
It's a little up and over.
I think we have to go with up and
It's
over.
like, it's
All
like,
right.
like a fly ball.
All right.
You just throw a fly ball over there.
I'll take up and over for 400, Jeff.
So the opposite of
You usually have to pay a lot more than
wild
400 for that.
fermentation is what? What's the opposit of wild
I think
fermentation?
Cultured?
probably going on this.
Cultured fermentation?
Cultured?
Cultured?
Right, Chris?
Yes.
All right, go for it.
He's just throwing her right in.
All right, everybody. Chris has got this one.
All right.
So actually kind
Smoke
of
if you got 'em.
kind of a cool, we just figured this out last week, which small world, I guess, if you want to say that. Or last week, or last time we were here, I should say. I used to work for White Labs, is where my yeast background comes from.
Do you see that look on my face? What's White Labs?
Oh, I'm sorry. White sorry. White Labs is a yeast company. They sell cultured yeast, grown yeast to breweries, home brewers, that sort of thing. So they grow cultured yeast, which is the opposite of wild yeast, to breweries and home brewers. So I was a sales and technician for White Labs. I went in for a sales position, just a customer service girl, and I was fortunate enough to be able to work under Chris White, who is the founder of White Labs, like the grand poobah, if you will, and also under Neva, which was his Padawan. And so I had them, it was a small, super small company when I started. And so I was able to gain all the knowledge that I could absorb from them, asking questions.
What year was this when you started there?
When was I there? A while ago. Let's just say a while ago.
Okay.
Let's just.
Are you in the 20-ish year range?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we'll just say a while ago. But anyways, I was able to...
I was just trying to, because you said back when they were super tiny, so I was trying to kind of timeline.
They
it sounds like maybe they're huge now.
Yeah, they kind of exploded overnight, just like the beer industry did itself, right? The beer industry went from being a few craft breweries, like you think of Avery and you think of New Belgium, and then overnight it just went boom, and on every corner there was a craft brewery. So.
I'm 48, and when I was becoming of legal drinking age, Sam Adams was about as cool and hip, and now look where we are, 28 years later.
Exactly.
Christ on crutches.
So, and it wasn't as, it wasn't as small
breweries.
as that, but. He was still pretty small. So anyway, back to the story of Small World. We were sitting here, and we have a unique last name. Our last name is Porn.
So where does that name come from?
That's the After Hours podcast.
No, okay. No, is that part 2?
Yeah.
Part 2 with the porn.
We turn the lights down.
Porn?
Like pornography without the ography.
Without the ography. It's the last thing you looked up on the internet before you got here today.
Yeah, please go ahead and Google Chris and Jeff porn.
So we were sitting here having beers, and he said, "I used to talk to you on the phone.
Yep.
I used to order yeast from you."
Awesome.
So I used to work for White Labs, and I had Chris White.
Never forgotten the name.
Wait, hold on.
Well, Joe Policino was a good man. He's like, okay, so I'm going to turn over all the White Lab stuff over to you. It's like, don't laugh. Her name is Chris Porn. And I was like, all right. It's like, she could be a little mean sometimes.
You're getting
like,
yeast
no
off
way.
porn.
I
This is true.
got on the phone with her. No, she was the nicest lady in the
think
world.
she's perfectly lovely.
As long as you're nice to her.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you're nice to me.
you don't be an asshole.
As it should be.
When you would get brewers that would call you up and say, I started my brew and my yeast is in here," and I'm like, why would you do something so stupid? It's like,
Nice.
why would you bake a cake without flour? Like, it doesn't
Well,
make sense
it's on
to
the
me.
UPS truck.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
on the UPS truck.
So, anyways,
Yeah, thank you.
that when I started there, I just started as customer service, and I really didn't have that much knowledge about. I liked beer, essentially, and I didn't have that much knowledge about yeast. I knew what it was. I'm a science major.
Okay.
My background is in science. I went to school for biology. I've been a zookeeper my whole life.
Wait, this is not going to be your first guest appearance on this podcast. Zookeeper.
Hold the phone,
You are
ladies
the
and gentlemen.
first zookeeper I've ever met in my life. I'm sorry. You're going to have to get used.
Serious, Clark?
So to add to that,
What are you talking about? Add to that.
to add to that, she did actually work and travel with the carnival for a while.
Oh
did. I
my
traveled with the
gosh,
carnival.
Chris Porn. This is amazing.
She was the headless woman, Beast Girl.
I was Sheena the Ape Woman. Get it
Sheena the
straight.
Ape Woman. She was the pixie dust spreader on the Tilt-A-Whirl.
I was not, but I did bark for the world's largest wombat. And anyways, so we'll talk about that later.
So much about square shapes.
So that's a whole separate podcast.
Is there acid in this beer? Because I feel like I'm tripping right now with these stories. This is insane. But yeah, mushrooms are legal there, right?
We did brew this beer in Denver.
But anyway, I'm sorry. We just went
I
off
didn't
on
know anything about. I didn't know anything about yeast per se. I just knew about beer, and that's how I got hired. So I was lucky enough to have these two amazing people at my beck and call. And so I read his books front and back and forward, and I asked thousands of questions. And I could call him up, and he would answer my call, which is amazing to have. The president of this country. Sorry.
It's tremendous. Greatest yeast ever.
Tremendous yeast. To have the
Missed something,
president, president of this company just be able to answer my emails and my phone calls without any hesitation. So I learned a great deal. And then I was able to answer tech calls for brewers, and that was great. And
belittle them for being morons.
Oh my God.
You.
The stories that I would hear when she would be making fun of these guys.
Does one pop to the top of your head? Your fondest?
No.
Why does it involve you and it's embarrassing?
No,
Okay.
I was, because I used to work at a yeast lab as well.
Okay.
I worked at Lallemand up in Montreal. That's where I did my internship, making dry yeast. It was awesome. So I knew how to deal with.
You know the yeast talk.
Yeah, like.
You know your way in and out of the yeast factory.
Talk to techs. It's cool. Just get a little nerdy.
Yeah.
super
And,
nerdy. Super
and,
nerdy.
and then all you hear is, and they like cleaning off the drool off the phone.
Well, you didn't go from customer service at White Yeast, right? Am I saying, is that what it was
White
called?
Labs.
White Labs.
So I did both. I did customer service and I did tech all at the same time, and I took orders, and so I was just on the phone. So I did everything.
Okay.
So someone would call and say, I want to order, X, 001, and then the next guy would call and be like, you stupid bee, blah, 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 blah. And then the next one would call and say, I got stalled fermentation. And so I did it all. And it was fun, and it was a great experience. And the best part about it is I learned a ton. And
you learned all the mistakes that everyone else made without making your own mistakes. I think that's important.
No, what was great was that I learned mistakes. So I was able to take that home to us, and
I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah. I was able to make mistakes and have fun with those mistakes instead of getting frustrated by the mistakes.
Punching a hole in the wall.
Right. So we
like
brought that home.
That's what I do.
I was able to take that knowledge home for us and have fun. And so that goes into where we were able to grow our own yeast. So we do pitch yeast. So we're not just all wild fermentation. We do pitch yeast, but it's our yeast. We grew it from our own fruits, our own, from our own plants on our property. We harvested it ourselves.
House culture.
Yeah, our house culture. So we went out to our own land and we grabbed it and we grew it up and we fed it and we kept it warm and we watched it grow mold and we weeded it out and we, fed it again and we kept the good ones and took the bad ones and we smelled it and it smelled like hot garbage and said that's not going to be good and we just kind of played with it and saw what was going to be a good child and which was going to be a naughty child, and we blended the good kids and we threw away the bad ones and just ended up with this wonderful yeast that we love. And go ahead.
I was going to say, to kind of put a little context to it so that you'll get an idea of what
2-year-old.
Right, where she's at.
Yeah,
is
sorry.
that probably, I would say 98% of the breweries in the world buy their yeast from a lab.
98%.
I would say, when you say 95%, 98%, somebody said they buy their yeast from a lab like White Labs, and there's there's a bunch of them now. So we've, in the entire existence of our brewery, we've never once bought yeast from a lab. We've just always used what I consider to be true wild fermentation, where we grew our own yeast, captured our own yeast. So just to give you a little idea of
So yeast is super important to you. You take your yeast very seriously.
Yeah, I mean,
because
without the yeast that we have, we're, in my mind, we're kind of just like any other brewery out there that makes barrel-aged
Well,
wild
yeast
fermentation
gives your product 75% of its flavor. So you can take a same, let's say we have, and this was something cool that they did at White Labs. If you ever go to White Labs in California, it was something neat that they did in their tap room. They would make a batch of beer, or I would say a batch of wort, and they would have 5 different, the same wort, 5 different barrels, we'll say buckets of it, okay? And they would inoculate it or pitch 5 different kinds of yeast into each bucket. So 5 different buckets, 5 different yeast into each bucket. And every bucket would taste different at the end when it was done fermenting. Even though it was the same wort, at the end, it would all taste different. That's how important yeast is in your product.
You're only talking 4 ingredients, right? You're talking water, you're talking barley, and you're talking hops, and the yeast will change the whole deal.
So I have to back up a little bit, but what the heck is yeast? Is it a grain? What is yeast?
It's a single-celled microorganism.
Yeah, it's all the little things that he was talking about. It's all the little things that he was talking about in the beginning that was in that bucket.
I mean, it's everywhere.
Floating, it's floating around.
It's on you.
It's here. It's on this microphone.
It's in your beard.
Yeah.
Nose and mouth.
Okay. All right. This is awesome.
Yeah, you got some wild yeast going on.
So when we make bread at home, we go to the store, we get yeast. What is that thing? What's it attached to? I mean, I'm buying something. I can see something
yeast.
in a bag.
It's a lot of protein that it's attached to.
Okay.
To give it actual
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
You're freaking out.
I am freaking out. I am freaking out. I feel like I just heard about the coronavirus for the first time. Like, you're telling me it's everywhere? It's in everything I touch?
See, now you know how I feel when I read the book and I had, had my guru sitting down that you were able to ask all these questions. So you have a science nerd and you have someone that I'm reading the Bible and I have Jesus that I can ask the questions to. That's how you feel, and you just get all jazzed about it. So now, that's the feeling you get,
Super jazz.
You get all tingly.
The yeast is in charge, and we're just basically creating an environment for the yeast to sing its symphony or whatever you want to, however you want to make it sound.
I don't know. We're not made of yeast, but it's all over us. It's all over everything. And the thing is that whether you're making bread or you're making beer or anything, it's taken centuries and centuries to isolate certain varieties of yeast for making bread and for making beer. And what we do here to a smaller extent than what they're doing at Adam is isolating yeasts that work for them, because like I said, there's millions of them, and how do you find that particular one that makes something that is in this glass right here that I want to drink?
This is your beer we're drinking right now.
Well, I know I've moved on.
And I get it now. I see
talking.
your bumper stickers over there, and it's ATOM. It's an atom. So now I get it's all starting to make sense. ATOM.
They're a bunch of nerds, but they're all right.
Yeah, but really cool nerds. Cheers to that. I love it. Thank you for your nerdship. It's fantastic. All right, so
Excellent beer.
your if I remember where we left off to go off on a little fun tangent there of my mind being blown with yeast. You've learned all the mistakes, all of that kind of stuff, right? Is that where we left off at? Yeah.
We were talking about what happens. I think the question was we talked about the good way that wild fermentation can go. I think your question was what happens when it goes the other way or the bad way.
Thank God Jeff's here.
I think
that Jeff. Yeah.
Which Jeff?
That one.
I think
Jeff Porn.
There's too many Jeffs in this room.
So something about that is it's the environment in which you nurture that cell, or it's like having a baby, or like having something that you take care of. It's like the environment that it lives in has a huge part to do with it, but it's also how you capture that wild yeast or that wild bacteria, because there's also tons of bacteria in the air, Jeff. So that's a
which
whole
is
other
all
thing.
over you.
Yeah. There's not just yeast. There's also tons of bacteria, and we like to refer to it as just microflora.
So when you talk about
microflora, that's just how we.
I just heard the scream and goat. Is it time for another scream and go question?
it may be.
Well, we thought that was you with the yeast and everything all over you.
Now that you realize that you're covered
that was
with
your
yeast and
internal
bacteria.
screaming goat.
when you say the environment that you grow yeast, right? Is that how big of an environment is it? If this thing is it like I'm picturing a petri dish.
It can be any scale, but it's cleanliness, temperature, the medium that yeast is growing within. It's everything.
How do you collect
just
it?
Just like human beings living on the earth.
Think about a healthy environment. You have to have the right temperature, and you have to have food, and you have to have oxygen or gas, right? Everything has to have that. You have to have food, you have to have the right temperature, and you have to have the right gases. It's the same.
Clean.
It's the same thing. Well, it doesn't
Not necessarily.
It doesn't necessarily have to be clean, but you have to have some kind of food. You have to have some kind of temperature, and you have to have some kind of gas. So yeast has to have a temperature, a food, and a gas.
Like sugar.
Sugar.
Well, that's what we want to feed it.
Okay. Okay.
Because we want to make alcohol,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
So if you're collecting yeast, right? So there are some basic things, right? So there's yeast all over you. So we take a sample off of you.
I'm a baby beer.
You're a baby
I could
beer.
be born into a
So
beer.
we've
You're not here yet.
Right.
Okay, so we've got
sugar water.
so we've
I'm out.
isolated. Let's say we've isolated 40 yeast samples off of your beard, right? Well, now we want to make
Which
beer.
they have made beer.
Yes, they have.
Beard beer.
They've also done other things where they got yeast from too.
Other body parts that yeast has come from. That
Of course, the porns know all about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to simplify it even further, it's like, so the yeast then has to make beer, right? So, but all yeast doesn't want to do what we want it to do, right? So we want it to, A, be able to eat sugar and create alcohol. We need it to survive a certain amount of alcohol, right? So there has to be a survivability, which not all yeast does. So all of a sudden, your 40 samples have just dropped to 20 because they can't get above 2%, right? And we want to get to at least 4. Then we add other things to it that want to kill yeast. You know, hops are, known to kill stuff. That's the whole reason we put it in there. And a lot of yeast doesn't like hops because it kills them.
Let's also make sure that we give it enough sugar, because if we don't give it enough sugar, what does it start to do?
Get
It starts to
stressed out.
eat itself.
Yeah.
They start to eat their brothers and sisters because when they have enough sugar, they'll start to multiply. They'll multiply and they'll multiply. Well, they multiply so much, if they don't have enough sugar to eat, they go, oh shit, there's nothing to eat. They'll start to eat each other. And so they're little buggers.
Right. So out of
This
the
is scary.
millions of yeast that are out there, trying to find the ones that make this
Beer.
Beer.
is a long process.
Let's give my brain a break. Let me ask a question about goats.
All right, go talk.
All right.
Goats love
goat
beer.
time.
They do. Is that a fact?
Or at least the ones
Do
behind
goats love
my
beer?
house.
I ain't going on the record.
All right.
The ones behind my house do.
Legend has it
Bears,
goats discovered
Battlestar
what
Galactica.
berry? The blueberry, the coffee berry, the blackberry, or none of the above? Goats discovered this berry.
None.
Blueberry, coffee berry,
Chuckberry.
blackberry,
Chuckberry.
or none of
That's not a choice.
I'm going to go with the coffee berry.
I was going to go with dingleberry.
No, it's not a sugar.
No.
No, that's Siobhan.
That's the
Siobhan. That's the butter, right?
That's the cat.
Siobhan?
Chris, you're showing that you own goats. It's coffee berry, which I didn't even know was a thing.
I know
Coffee berry.
because Juan Valdez on the label walks with a goat.
Is it a goat or is it a donkey?
And of course, our producer, Mr. Valdez.
I think it's a donkey.
We'll go with
Good
goat.
answer
We'll go
to
with
that
goat for this, right?
He was exempt from that question.
Yeah.
I was like, was it a
How would
goat?
you be so
That's
All right.
Juan Valdez was really short there.
I believe it was a goat.
Way to call her out.
I was like, I think it's a donkey.
Did I mention I was a zookeeper?
What's a coffee berry? First off, did they have coffee berries at the zoo? What's a coffee berry?
That's where the bean comes from.
Nah.
It comes
It's a
from the
seed.
tree. It comes from the bush.
Nah.
It's what you roast to make coffee.
The
Unbelievable.
pit of a
Do we
pit
mention
of
he's
a
from
coffee
Pennsylvania?
berry is a coffee bean.
There is a bean. A bean's a berry?
You're a bean. You're a Jeff
berry,
bean.
a berry and a bean are the same thing.
No.
Okay.
No, the berry
No,
is the fruit. The bean is the pit, the seed.
Seed.
Wow. All right.
God.
All right. That
Sorry,
checks out.
you
That
just
checks
looked at
out.
me like you wanted to punch me
That
in the
checks
face.
out.
Like,
No, that's
this
just
little
confusion.
kid.
That's
And then if
me
you
being
feed that to a
confused.
civet cat and you squeeze that. No.
So why do we think the goat discovered the coffee berry?
Goats are dope.
Because goats are browsers, which means that they eat from trees and bushes. And so I would imagine that the goat was browsing from a tree and ate a coffee bean and freaked the frig out.
Sounds like you're reading a textbook. No offense. With all due respect.
You got mad knowledge up in that head.
It's not all just hair.
But just so you know, I do not brew beer. I'm not a brewer.
Okay.
She's a zoologist.
Yeah.
Zoologist,
She
clearly.
brewed one batch and she
I
absolutely
hated it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not a brewer.
You just love beer.
Yeah, I love beer. I like. I'm a taster and a smeller. That's where and the yeast, obviously the sciencey part of it, but the brewing part of it is not my jam at
We
all.
talked about this earlier. Just because you really love beer doesn't mean you have to be a brewer or own a brewery.
Right. It's so much easier to
can
just
you
love
can
beer.
you can just enjoy
You
it.
can
Yes.
just drink beer. I remember those days.
Yeah.
Those days.
Wait, so you know what? This happens a lot with people when they're so into it. You don't musicians who are out touring forever end up hating music. And are you worried about that? Do you ever think like, oh my gosh, I'm so deep into this, I don't like it anymore?
No.
Okay.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
It's more
Let's
like
not get crazy.
Yeah.
I'm so deep into this, and my band sucks, and I need to like,
Find a
go
new
get
band.
a different job.
Okay.
'cause,
I like that.
I don't know.
The drummer's
That's
gotta
nice.
go.
It's
There's
hard.
also a good balance,
It's a hard thing to, it's a hard truth to
There's
come
also
to.
a good balance though, because I'm good behind the bar and with people, and then he's good not.
Well, we can also,
Sounds like Megan and I.
it's, the other side of it too, and we were talking about this and joking about it earlier this evening. There's so much more that you do
Yeah, don't
That
fool
has
yourself. It's not a business.
that has nothing to do with making, owning and running a brewery. The making beer part is probably the least thing that you spend time doing. There's so much more that goes on. So, being around it all the time sometimes gets a little, I wouldn't say it turns you off from beer, but with our case, it's actually, you get to the point where you're like, I don't feel like beer right now, and it actually piques your interest to go and explore other avenues. So like wine, especially with wild fermentation, the wine industry and wild fermentation kind of go really, really close hand in hand. So you start learning about how wines are made and characters of wine and things like that, because they're very close to the characters that you get out of wild fermentation or
So what you can really
spontaneous
gather from this is we just really like
Yeah,
drinking.
it's really
Right.
just
Form whatsoever.
It's actually perfect you put that because I've started going down the sake road.
yeah, sake's the
love
same way. Yeah,
sake.
sake's the same way.
I
right?
could definitely attest to the wild fermentation, and I'm not making wine, but I'm making cider, and cider's basically apple wine.
Right.
But I've done trial tests where it's like I will use either cider yeast or English or Scottish ale yeast or champagne yeast. And then I will do side by sides with wild fermented cider, and it's like the wild fermented cider from what is going on this farm and the yeast that's growing on the apple skins or whatever is going on there, it's like the acid and the tannins and the flavor that's coming off of that wild fermented cider is just so much more, like it has so much more character.
Right. Well,
And it feels like all those other ciders that have had yeast pitched on them, they're so muted, and the wild fermentation is just like it's got so much more character.
well, sure, and I mean, we could get off into the whole realm of like what is true wild fermentation and what's not, right? So if you're looking at like what I consider to be true fermentation, where you're not necessarily pitching yeast, but
Right.
Either like where we grew our own yeast, or you could start getting off into spontaneous fermentation, and you could start blurring the line as spontaneous fermentation, wild fermentation, is it the same or whatnot?
Right.
So in my mind, in true wild fermentation, you've got multiple strains of yeast and bacteria that are actually fermenting your beer.
Right.
So Whereas if you're pitching yeast, now unless you're the brewer and you're blending different pitches that
Right.
you've purchased, you know, you've got one strain doing the job. Whereas in true wild fermentation, you could have 15 different yeast and bacteria fermenting your beer at the same time, creating this multiple layers of character in that beer. That's why, you know, like you said, I mean, to me, the depth of true wild fermented beer is unmatched. I mean, it's...
Yeah, and it's like coming off of our apple press, there's just, you know, ultraviolet pasteurization going on, so it's not even heat treated, so any yeast cells aren't really being damaged from, or the bacteria cells, most bacteria cells aren't even really being damaged from that, just harmful ones.
Sure.
And so it's like, what's going into that cider is so alive and so raw, and there's nothing being added to it.
Yep.
And what's coming out and the end product is so amazing. And it's so consistent. It's been working really well for us for years now.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't have any reason to change it.
Yeah, and
It's been working so well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the cool thing with wild fermentation too is, you know, on the surface you hear wild fermentation and you think that the results are ultimately going to be all over the place. Yeah. But it actually can be very clean and consistent if you...
Somebody's always dominant, right?
Well, sure, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's always, you may throw 20 strains in the pool, but there's always going to be somebody that comes out that's more dominant, right?
Well, that's why I like to do these the cool ship beers, because they're different every single time that I brew them, and they're only I only brew them. Let's see, that has a blend of one that I did early spring, late winter, and blended with late summer, early fall. So it's like a blend of, it's like 7 and 13-month-old. But yeah, it's just all what's blowing around. I like to call it spontaneously inoculating.
Well, I mean that's
And I inoculate it in the cool ship. It sits there, and it sits there overnight, and then I put it in barrels and kind of let it do its thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
freshly empty barrels that already had the same exact beer in there. So it's like, okay, so we got that one there. So there's already food with all that dead that's in there. And
This beer tastes like weed.
No, put that joint down.
Okay.
No, that's straight home, no strangers you're drinking.
But I mean, without really coming out and saying it, I mean, I think the general, thing that we've at least been insinuating to this point is when we talk about wild fermentation is that we're pitching yeast, right? So then you start going off into the realm of spontaneous fermentation, which is what you're talking about, which is probably the truest form of wild fermentation.
I like Belgian beers.
Yeah, which is, you know, spontaneous fermentation. You're not physically pitching yeast at all. You're just letting nature take its course, and in the process and how you brew a spontaneous beer, the way you let the beer cool, you're just pulling yeast in from the air, and you hope that you get something good out of it. You know.
Yeah. So just explain what a cool ship is.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. All right.
I was going to say,
So-
'cause you want the 4-year-old.
Yeah. So
Two.
So a cool ship is really just a large, shallow vessel. Okay, so, you know, you've obviously been in breweries before. I mean, you can turn around and see the tanks back there. I mean, those aren't necessarily, but you know what a typical fermentation vessel looks like, right?
Right.
So
It looks like that, actually.
yeah, it looks like a bottle, pretty much, upside down, upside down.
There's a line drawing on there.
Yeah, so a cool ship is just a wide, shallow vessel. And the process for brewing spontaneous beer is you go through the exact same steps that you would to make any other beer, except where you would normally take beer from boiling, cool it down to, you know, somewhere under 75 or so, or under 70, put it into a fermenter and pitch yeast. For spontaneous beer, you take it directly from boiling, move it into the cool ship, and then you let it sit overnight and just let it naturally cool itself.
So it
Yeah.
literally
Outside,
means that,
typically
see,
outside.
and while it-
spelling can be so confusing. This is the German spelling.
That's the
proper way.
That's the proper way.
Yeah. So it's.
My last name is Veltman, so I don't know.
So
but I'm
it's
also
typically-
Dutch, or I'm also Thai.
Let me ask you
Designed
this.
to
I'm also tired.
maximize.
Yeah.
The
Surface
surface
area.
area, right. And typically it's outside, or it's in a building where you're pulling air from inside, outside, inside, and you just let it naturally cool overnight, and then you take that wort, it's still technically wort at that point, put it into a barrel or some sort of vessel, typically a barrel, and you just let it sit, and you hope
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Yeah, you keep your fingers crossed that sometime within the next like 7 to 10 days, you start to see active fermentation in that barrel. And then you wait another 4 or 5 months before you even
before you
taste
pull
it.
Sample, yeah.
Because because you could get bad bacteria in there that we were talking about before, and you could taste it in a month or two, and and then you're sitting on the shitter
That
all
could
night.
shut you down as a brewery. That
Well, if you tried to serve something like that, sure.
Well,
Yeah.
no, I just mean
we
in
don't
general,
wanna
like
do that.
You've invested all this space and energy and time into something, and if that whole batch is gone, maybe you don't have anything to serve, right?
Well,
So,
yeah,
I mean, you could really mess up.
I mean, if you're banking your entire brewery on a cool ship beer,
Probably not the best
that's
business
not the best
plan.
business
Well, I think
decision
I
you've
think
ever made.
I think
be a
Cantillon
really
and
good freaking
I think Cantillon and Drefontaine, a
Yeah.
few breweries in Belgium that have been doing that for a few, over 1,000
Yeah, but I
years.
they're
think they
very
have
confident
1,000
in what
years
they're
of
doing.
practice.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, you say that, but think about us, right? So our brewery is 100% wood. We have no stainless vessels at all. So our beer goes from the copper vessels that we have for brewing it straight into some sort of wood vessel, and it spends its entire life in a wooden vessel until
I've never heard of a brewery doing it. I mean, obviously, I'm outside of you guys are impressed by that, those of you that are in the industry, but I've never seen that. I've never heard of that.
It's not popular because you run a huge risk of dumping a lot of beer, like because of the not only maybe your fermentation goes bad, but you got a bad batch of barrels because wooden barrels are porous and you don't know what's in there. You don't necessarily know how they were treated by the winery you got them from or something like that. So you're rolling the dice every time you brew a batch of beer, whereas you put it in a stainless tank. Obviously stainless, you can sanitize, you can clean it, you make sure it's good, where you can't sanitize a barrel. And you can steam it, all you want, but you're really never going to sanitize a barrel.
That's just like, that's the most like hardcore and like honest and amazing way to do what you do too. It's like the purest way to do it, like the most honest way to do it.
Well, if you think about it too, that's
It's
how
the most respectable way. Coming from being within the industry, it's just like the way that these guys are doing it. It's just like bow down to that. That's the coolest and the most like
like
respectable. way to
DJs
do
that
it.
still spin vinyl.
You guys are doing it. You guys are keeping it real.
Did we also mention?
Back to something
Did we also?
Yeah.
Keeping it real.
Did we also
I get
mention?
it, okay.
Did we also mention that we brew over open wood fire?
Yeah, keeping it real. Like,
Can I go
God
back to something
bless.
that you had said, Scott, that
Yeah.
that brought up this question? So you said what you love about the cool ship is that it's different every time.
Yes.
If you have a batch that you absolutely love, can you recreate that?
I cannot. So what I'll do is, because I have such a small system, I usually do in 53-gallon barrels. So I'll fill up 2 of those, and I'll keep one of those barrels, and I'll use it for blending. Because when you make a beer like this, you're basically blending. You'll take a little bit from this barrel, that barrel, and you kind of like make something. But if you have like one that's really primo, like I said, I have the 2 barrels, so I just keep the one and see how that evolves over time. And maybe that thing is going to be dynamite in like 5 years.
You could cheat with yeast, though.
I don't want to do that.
I know.
We're
but-
gonna
but
we're
what
gonna
I'm
wrap
saying-
up
You just
this
said you guys
episode.
are
Hold on.
keeping it real.
I know, but I'm
I want to
saying-
talk about
Yes.
cheating with yeast.
Yeah, you could cheat with
I want to.
yeast.
Yeah.
We've barely touched the tip of the iceberg on this one, but I want to keep these episodes at about an hour because I know what my attention span is, and we want to keep educating people and go. You can stay for another episode or a third one of this wild fermentation conversation with. Right? Is everybody on board with that?
Absolutely. We're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
going it. We have nowhere to go.
Wait, we're doing 3?
Because we
I don't know. Look at we
Homeless
barely
right
touched
now.
the
We
tip
don't
of
have
the
a hotel room, so I guess
We,
we're sleeping here.
We have more beer.
Yeah, it's right. There's going to be more beer. We're going to be fun. These are fantastic guests that we have. Chris and Jeff, Adam Farm and Fermentation, Indian Ladder Farms, Agricultural Acts. This is good for this. We're going to part 2 for the next episode.
Excellent.
You've been listening to Indian Ladder Farms Cidery and Brewery owner-operator Dieter Gary. Its head brewer, Scott Veltman, and its head cider maker, Alex Gill. The producers and engineers are Troy Pohl and Ian Carlton. Any questions, comments, thoughts, or suggestions can be directed to podcastilf@gmail.com. That's podcastilf@gmail.com. I'm Jeff Morad. Thanks for listening. See ya!